Well, hello and welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. Going to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. We've still got a number of people signing on, and actually our guest of honor is a little late arriving. So let me ramble on a little bit and remind people that we are in a webinar with quite a few people on it. So everyone is on mute. But that doesn't mean we don't want interaction. And so if you have questions, if you have comments, want to raise your hand, please feel free to use your GoToWebinar panel and submit anything you want. Again, this is one of a number of webinars that we put on and host in a series that allow us to kind of share some of the knowledge that we've picked up over the years. And this one happens to focus in on leadership development and 360 feedback. We also focus them on talent acquisition, talent development, performance management, and a number of other topics that are hopefully timely for a number of different organizations today. So for now, I am going to kind of play both roles and kind of get us going, and hopefully Rob will be joining shortly. We are trying to get in touch with him as we speak. So just a brief overview, want to cover an agenda, give a little bit of background and introductions, and really get into what I think everyone is probably more interested in hearing, and that is, why did FIFCO even choose to start using a 360? How does it fit into their leadership development plans? What are some of the issues that they face, some successes, and well, not failures, but some challenges, I guess, as they've gone through the process, and talk a little bit about best practices and let Rob share kind of what he has experienced over the years as well. 360 is, from a background standpoint, I am going to assume most people understand what a 360 is. We're not going to go into exactly what they are or how they can be used, but obviously they've been around for quite a while. Most applications, they are developmental in nature, and that is primarily going to be what we're going to focus on today. But they're also can be evaluative in nature. They can be used for performance, management, performance appraisal, part of a succession planning system from an assessment standpoint. The real point is, good data in leads to good data out, and with that good data, companies can make good decisions. And so they have been around a while, and then goes kind of ebbs and flows, but in cycles, their previous versions and previous experiences that a lot of people had over the years with 360s have not gone well. If they're not done right, they can actually be a little strong word maybe, but a nightmare for organizations. They become a popularity contest. They become a place for people to vent using non-productive kinds of questions and comments and responses. So if not done well, I think the 360 can actually do more harm than help. But obviously, if done right, it can be one of the best development tools that you'll ever find available for leadership development in particular. And again, they're not limited these days to just leadership development. They can be used for individual contributors. And the definition of 360 has really converted, in my mind, a multi-rater. So it can be a 180, it can be a 270, it can be a 720 look, depending on the rater groups. The real point is, we've got multiple perspectives, multiple views of somebody's performance, and from that, we can use that information to help craft a good development plan, and then hopefully have that development plan executed, which ultimately leads to behavior change on the job, which ultimately has a positive impact on a company's ROI. So we're going to talk about most of that today and how FIFCO is doing that. By way of a brief background, want to just kind of touch on who is Alignmark. We've been in business for over 4 decades now and partnered with numerous organizations in the areas of talent assessment, talent development, specifically in leadership development, across a wide variety of industries at all levels in the organization. And the real point here is that 360s are a good leadership development tool, no matter what your industry is, or no matter what the specific job is. Obviously, technical knowledge is different depending on which company you're working for, but ultimately, good leadership is good leadership. There's a set of common skills and a core set of skills that are necessary in any leader's job. And while that competency model may differ a little bit, there really is a finite number of competencies from a leadership standpoint that any company would be kind of happy with, again, organizationally. So with that, let me give you a little bit of introduction also into who your hosts are today. Again, my name is Dr. Cabot Jaffe. By background, I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist. I've been one of the original founders, at Alignmark as an organization. While our background is in industrial and organizational psychology, we have become as much a technology firm as many others. And ultimately, we have been able to kind of apply good science with that technology in order to provide cost-effective and really efficient solutions to organizations, again, with the focus being on it all starts with good data in my mind. If you have good behavioral items, if you're able to put together good content that allows people to make accurate ratings allow the focal leaders or participants to make good judgments based on those accurate ratings, and that's really how development does occur. So the other person that we will be hearing from more than me, so you don't have to sit there and listen to me ramble on about, is Rob Reitz. Really honored and privileged to be able to work with Rob over the last really year, with his year plus now, with his time at FIFCO. But his career started really last millennial. He's had a distinguished career at Paychex and operations, and based on his kind of own leadership training during that time, developed an interest and a passion for learning and development, and has been involved in all aspects of learning and development, from coaching to developing high potentials, to talent review processes, to succession planning. And I think in the last 2 years, since he started at FIFCO USA, he really took over the responsibility for all learning and development activities, but really with a significant portion of his role focused in specifically on leadership development, which I think ultimately over the years became his true passion. And that's why it's been such a great working relationship, because that's a passion of ours as well. And we've really learned a lot from Rob, and hopefully everyone else will today also. With that, Rob, give us a wave, and I think everyone is very happy you're joining us today. And with that, if you're ready, we're just going to kind of jump into some questions that I want to pose to you, and really start with, if you could give us a little bit of a history on, hey, why did FIFCO even choose to start using a 360 process as part of its leadership development efforts?
Yeah, sure thing, Kevin. Thanks for having me on. So, I think why we wanted to use 360s, it's pretty straightforward. Any organization, we need to drive results, and we need to lean on our leaders to be able to do that as well too. As we move forward, we want to look to our leaders within our organization to not just drive, what results they're getting, but how they're getting those results too. Meaning that we want them to become less involved in the day-to-day and working, what I like to call in the business, and working on the business. And what the 360 allows us to do is to be able to identify their effectiveness around certain behaviors that we want our leaders to be able to demonstrate on a day-to-day basis, and get them some feedback towards that, so that they can start to shift their ways of working, so that they could start focusing more on some of the strategic thinking and strategic aspects of the role, some of the responsibilities that come with developing people within their roles or within their organizations as well. So I think 360s are just an integral tool of being able to accomplish that. And I think anytime where we can allow somebody to see how others may perceive them or may see how they're showing up, I think that can be, if used properly, can just be an exceptional tool to be able to accomplish growth in our leaders or any leaders in any organization.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I know we've
Yeah.
talked over in the past, it really is a good accountability tool. It gives you kind of something that in my mind allows people to grab onto and say, okay, now I see what I can be held accountable to. So leadership development's this big amorphous concept, and everyone would say, yeah, I want to engage in leadership development. And then if left to their own devices, it kind of becomes well, okay, how do I do it? Or I can't kickstart myself. The 360 in my mind sometimes gets into, okay, here's the tool that's going to outline your path. And therefore now we can help better define for them leadership development and activities that surround that. So
yeah,
I really
I
appreciate
absolutely
that.
agree with that, Cabot. Just to hop in there, I think sometimes too we don't know what our blind spots are, especially when it comes to leadership. And sometimes we want to develop, and if we take that action on our own, we might focus on what's easy or what we're comfortable with. And 360s to really drive true development, it's about kind of embracing what I'm not comfortable with and identifying that at first, and then being able to work a plan to be able to grow and develop whatever that might be.
Yep, that's great. So once FIFCO decided, okay, we're going to go ahead and implement a 360 process, and we'll talk about the difference between a 360 report and a whole developmental process. What were some of your challenges, if any, that you had implementing this process as a leadership development tool?
Yeah, I think we had a couple expected and a couple unexpected. I think anytime that you introduce this process, there's always a little bit of apprehension. There might be some nervousness that one may face. I know I've had 360s done, and I've gone through them a number of times, and every time it's, what might come out of this, or what might somebody see in me. So I think there's always making sure that you can help people feel at ease and share, how it will benefit them, to get them to buy in and really see the value of the process. I think with this year, we really tried to kick this process off in the beginning of 2020, and we had a plan, and we all know what hit around February and March. So our leaders kind of had to react quickly to making sure that their functions stayed viable, that they stayed productive. We had a plan earlier in the year, put all of our senior leaders through a 360 plan, and when COVID kind of came into reality, we had to cut that short. So we had to kind of adjust that. And then another challenge just has to do with time, right? Our business this year is doing great because of some of the productivity measures we put in place, because of some of our great products. But with that comes volume and comes more work, and just finding the time and prioritizing that, making leaders see that that's a priority, I should say. I think can be a challenge in fitting that into their day-to-day schedule as well too. So again, I think really it's about how do you sell the what's in it for me for them, and show them the benefits of this process and how they're going to grow from it, how they're going to benefit from it, to try to alleviate some of those challenges.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know, like you said, with feedback, there's always a sense of apprehension that some people have. And then if one person gets it, it seems like it kind of grows, and the word kind of spreads like, what is this thing? Why are we doing this again? And
Yeah.
the real point there also is plans change, things change, business change. I think with you, we had also hey, let's start smaller. Let's not start with the whole executive committee. Let's take one person, make it a success, show people that no, this isn't being used to fire people, and therefore we can have them kind of spread the good word around. Oh, this was really great. It really helped. And so there's always going to be challenges with implementing any 360, and the key is, okay, how do you adapt and use some, change your plan in order to make sure it's successful as you go through? Because there's a whole lot of things, I've been preaching about good content, but word of mouth on how the organization perceives it is going to really be the biggest. One person tells 10 friends that this was horrible, it's not going to get any buy-in. One person tells 10 friends this was great, now others may be eager to go ahead and get going
Right.
also.
Right.
So I didn't get into a whole lot of detail in the introduction about FIFCO USA and really didn't even explain the brands. Maybe you can give us even a little bit of a history or how your company kind of came to be, and who is FIFCO USA. I think everyone here knows that beer's involved, which is always exciting for people, but
Yeah.
kind of what's the background, and then, hey, dealing with multiple cultures in multiple ways
Sure.
has some challenges. Kind of share with
Sure.
what's.
Yeah. So we are the 8th largest alcoholic beverage brewer in the United States. So we're not Miller Coors or Budweiser or anything like that, but we are quite proud of our size and our reach. We have a couple different histories. So we have a few different brands. One being Genesee beer. Genesee has been brewed in Rochester, New York since the mid 1800s. It's a well-known brand in Western New York. It's a very regional beer, but there's a lot of history with Genesee, and there's a lot of pride that comes with Genesee. And in Rochester, New York, that's where our brewery is. So our headquarters are located here in Rochester, where I sit as well too. Over the last 15, 20 years, there have been some changes to that. We've became North American breweries about 20 years ago. Along the way, we acquired the rights to distribute Labatt's Blue and Labatt's Blue Light and some of those products that are associated with that. We also do brew and distribute Seagrams and Seagrams malt beverages, so some of the different Seagrams, and those are available nationwide. So our beers are very regional. We have 4 primary states that we sell our beer portfolio to. But when it comes to some of our other products like Seagrams, and we're starting to dip our feet into the world of seltzer, those are our national products. So when you look at Rochester and the number of employees here, a majority of those employees work in our production side of our business and in the plant, making beer, making the beverages that we do sell. We also have a pretty good footprint in Buffalo, New York. When Genesee and Labatt USA kind of came together as one company, that was stationed in Buffalo. But then we have a lot of our other commercial parts of the business that are, scattered geographically diverse across the country. So what comes with that is if you think about the manufacturing side of any business, it's really focusing on product, creating product, getting the work done to get the product out. It's a very technical type of focus. We have quotas, we have production schedules that we have to meet, we have demand we have to meet. Let's get the job done. Or the commercial side of our business, which is more focused on sales and marketing, they rely on the soft skills on a day-to-day basis to get their jobs done, right? If you think of somebody who's in sales, when they're meeting with an account or a wholesaler out in their world, they're using their influence skills, they're using their communication skills and their presence to be able to be effective and move our products into their areas of business. So we have one side of the business that is very comfortable and understands the importance of some of those softer skills that you do focus on a 360 with. And then you have our manufacturing side that it's not as familiar and it's certainly not as comfortable to discuss, those softer skills that are necessary for them to be successful when it comes to leadership. So the buy-in and how individuals embrace that process definitely varies depending on the manufacturing side versus the commercial side. It takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more explanation on the manufacturing side to be able to buy leaders into the process. Again, they're producing our product right now. They're very busy, so even to find an hour or so to to complete the assessment, to rate somebody or rate themselves can sometimes even be a challenge. So we really have to sell the benefits, the what's in it fee, for them to go through that process. And that can certainly be a challenge because of the difference our organization in our cultures, I should say.
Yeah, that's great. We're not saying that all, sales and marketing people are open to 360s and all manufacturing people aren't by any means.
Right.
It just really within their culture, uh, we're working with two, executives right now, one in sales that really is eager for all of these
Yeah.
calls that we have with them and this whole process and how quickly can they get it down to his team. And then we have the head of one of the breweries that is like, you're selling more than we can produce. I am working and my entire team is, they don't have computers necessarily at everyone's workstations. They're pulling people off the floor. It's just not the right time for development. Can I wait? And really the answer is if you wait until it's ever the perfect time, you're going to wait forever. And so sometimes, as Rob said, we got to, do a little internal selling. But depending on the situation, you may also have to call an audible periodically and move from one direction to the next. So you mentioned, and I don't necessarily we don't take an hour, it doesn't take an hour to fill out the survey. That's really the easy part. That's
Right.
probably the quickest. I get an email, I click a link, there's
Yeah.
maybe 20 minutes is what we shoot for.
Yeah.
But once the feedback report's done, it starts with, okay, give me an hour call to go over the feedback report. Okay, we're going to schedule another call to go over a development plan. Okay, now let's get some coaching going. And obviously, for some people, that's a tough process, and for others, they're open and eager to it. What have been, for your specific organization, some of the candidate reactions? How have some of the people felt about going through the process? Have you had any tough cases to deal with, and kind of how do you handle those?
Yeah. I think there's both. Once again, for those that have never gone through a 360 process, which is common in FIFCO right now, it is a new process to the organization. Again, what is it? I'm gonna have multiple people rate me and give me feedback, and what are they gonna say? And there's gonna be nerves. There's gonna be, that ambiguity can really kind of stifle somebody in their thinking and really kind of close them off to this is valuable for me. But then, I've had at FIFCO and in my previous roles, I've had leaders that have been very grateful for the opportunity because they crave feedback. They want to know where they stand. They want to know what they can do to develop themselves and be more effective. They're appreciative that a company wants to invest in them. So I've definitely seen both sides of the spectrum from all parts. But I can remember a specific situation that I've had probably my most challenging experience with a 360 and a 360 process was an individual that I worked with at Paychex and just was very against it. Just did not embrace the process, was not in support of it, and was pretty much told you have to go through this. So he was put through it. He was assigned raters. We debriefed his report. Again, although the report, I would say in my eyes, was much more favorable than, not even unfavorable, but there was a lot more positive in what he was doing versus some of the constructive criticism. All he could focus on was what he saw as the negative. And that really kind of consumed his mindset for the first month that we would talk about this. And from my point of view, I had to be patient. I had to be empathetic. I didn't want to dismiss his feelings, but I also wanted to get him to transition into a point where he could see that information as, they say feedback is a gift, is something that was allowing him to see where maybe he wasn't making the impact that he needed to. And slowly over time, you could see that his attitude started to change. It wasn't trying to dive right into what can we do about this, but really had to give him the space to emotionally come to terms with it. And once that happened through some of the support and some of the conversations we had, then we were able to move into, okay, what are we going to do about this? What actions can we take? What are the steps that we're going to take? 6 months later, one of my most proud moments, so to say, was when he looked at me and said, thank you. I didn't believe in this. I was afraid of it. I didn't know what was going to be said. I don't have I didn't have as much confidence as I wanted in myself at that time, and that's why I think I was afraid. And now going through this process and you leading me through this, I could see why I needed to go through this and how much it's helping me. And his results were fantastic from that point on. And I think that's my biggest lesson that I would share with anybody is you have to give at first, you have to give people the space and the time to be able to overcome kind of that first initial reaction, especially if it isn't one that's positive, and not just jump into, okay, well, yeah, it said, what are we going to do? You have to give them that space. And I think if you do that correctly, you have a much greater chance at success with this whole process.
I think you bring up two huge points that I think people can take away. One is, what's the upfront message to the people? You know, what is the organization telling people up front about how this is going to be used, how it's not going to be used? And that's going to lead, unfortunately, not everyone's going to take the message the same way. Some people will be eager, some people will still be very apprehensive. And, you know, it really comes down to somebody's readiness for this activity and readiness for change as to how it will actually play out and the effectiveness of it playing out. And if you take the same approach with everyone, you'll lose some. There's some people that aren't ready yet. You've got to adapt, as Rob described with that particular individual, to get them to the readiness point before you even focus on the leadership development part. Because if you jump right into leadership development, you know, if the person hadn't bought into it, hasn't bought into the process, the content, the feedback, that they're not going to change. They're going to shut down, and they're going to, you know, you're going to feel like you're pulling teeth as you try and talk to this person and getting them involved. And so the real point there is, yeah, there's messaging that goes out, there's some upfront selling that goes out to the group, but you may also need to look at individual cases and say, okay, we need a little bit extra here. We need a little bit different process with this person because they're not ready yet, so to speak. Kind of leads into, hey, what are, you know, some of the best practices? Really answers the question, hey, why do you think your 360 process has been successful? You know, and I know we've talked about this, and not everyone is the same, and 360s for a lot of people in the end of or in the past have had a bad rap. But at FIFCO, you know, overall, I know it's somewhat successful as people are changing their behaviors, but what are some of the things you can do to help make it be successful?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Cabot. You know, I think one of the first things that we did with, you know, Line Mark's help and your help was help to ensure that the assessment that we were going to deliver and use was aligned with our expected competencies and the expected behaviors from those competencies. And you know, I think that is critical because it helps us to align our kind of leadership development process on the back end. We're not just kind of scattered and just teaching different things, so that consistency is important. But I think it also helps to kind of reinforce what we're trying to establish within our own culture and what we've been discussing as what our desired culture is moving forward and what information and data we're looking for from these 360s, and those being aligned, I think, is critical, right? It shows that kind of we've got our act together, so to say. It shows that we have a strategy in terms of what we're trying to do around developing our leaders moving forward. But just that commonality, I think, is critical to get everybody on the same page and kind of rowing the ship together. So I think that's one reason why we're seeing success. And I think the second thing, and I think you've mentioned it, it's not just an assessment. It's not just here's some feedback, here you go, do what you want with it and move on. But it's really a process. And there are actions that we're taking through individual development plans and conversations that we're having that are really allowing leaders that have participated in this process and that are continuing to participate to really see the growth in themselves. And, you know, I think that's what a great coach can do, a great mentor, is to really drive that growth as a result of what they see and provide that partnership with the individual who's taking the 360 to get them to drive those necessary results and be more effective. So I think, again, using the assessment as part of a bigger coaching process has really allowed us to see a lot of success and value from it.
Yeah, that's great. You bring up a point that I didn't mention earlier, and that is the 360 sometimes for organizations, I think can help the organization to future the organization. So where is, your skill set now as it relates to your culture and environment, and how do you, especially with you, bring together multiple cultures and all put people in the same kind of language and mindset around leadership and what's expected? In a lot of ways, it's not necessarily only to focus on, it kind of gives you what's the current state of affairs, but if you have a good picture of where you want to get to, now you have an identified gap that says, oh, okay, our people aren't yet ready to deal in this new world of what we want the organization to be. And so that kind of, for me, leads me to one of my favorite quotes now these days. By Rob Wright's FIFCO USA. I guess spend 60 seconds telling us how you've pointed out really what should be obvious to a lot of people.
It's I learned this, and I guess I came up with this, and I don't know if it's mine originally. I heard someone else have, but early on my leadership development career, facilitating classes and training programs for new leaders, and you get asked the question, and a lot of times my answer would be, well, it depends. Right? Tell me more. Tell me what this person's experiences were. Tell me what you initially, or how you initially reacted, and a lot of those different variables are going to impact what approach is necessary moving forward. There's not a cookie cutter, or I should say there's very rarely a black and white answer to a question that involves somebody's development in terms of their leadership skills. And so that's where I kind of came up with that, is that everybody kind of has their own history, they have their own experience, they have their own filters, they have their own beliefs, and how they may see one situation may be completely different than how somebody else sees a situation. And I think from my perspective, how I've moved forward from that is in developing and coaching and being part of kind of this line of work, is that you have to stay curious, because everybody's situations are different. It could be the same words, but how they see it could be totally opposite of somebody else.
Yep. Leadership skills are behavioral skills. This is not what I'd call a cognitive skill, which is, let me go to a class. Here are the 6 good steps to leadership. Oh, I get to step 1, step through step 6. I got it. I'm a great leader now. Changing behaviors, which people have built up for years, leadership behaviors, it takes practice. It takes feedback. It takes a plan. It is not just, here's the course of A, B, C, D, and you've got it. It is not black and white by any means. And for different people, they need to capitalize on other strengths they may have to make that process of development easier. Some people struggle there. Some people, will find certain ways of learning easy. But the real point is, it's not black and white. There's a whole lot of options, which we'll get into kind of the role of coaching in a bit. So as an organization, FIFCO chose to outsource parts of the process. And whether it's a line mark or anyone else, why do you think organizations should, and why did FIFCO choose to outsource parts of that entire process?
Well, I think, certainly we could have done something internally. We could have created a report using, a tool like SurveyMonkey and put questions in and gathered feedback. But I think what it comes down to is a few things. One, that would have taken a ton of time, right? It's in FIFCO, it's myself right now from a learning and development perspective, and I have one specialist. And I just think, the time was definitely a factor in creating that, processing the reports, et cetera, et cetera. I think too, just the tool itself, that you provide from a line mark, and the report, I should say, is fantastic. So once we looked at how that report was organized, the way it looked aesthetically, how the information is spread out and how it's communicated, it's very simple. It's easy to read, it's easy to follow, and I thought that was a major factor. But I think, maybe most importantly, is with a 360 process, there's got to be that perception of confidentiality and anonymity. And I just don't know if coordinating that process on our own would have communicated a message of you could feel safe being very candid and open about your manager when it's going to come back to HR. So for those reasons, I just think it was important for us to outsource this. The value is incredible. Plus, taking a lot of the administrative work away. I know your team handles a lot of that process for us. I think it makes the overall process much more effective. Again, I think most importantly, one, because of the report and how the information is relayed, and then two, the confidentiality that comes with it.
Yeah, great. Sometimes just having an outside party kind of corroborate what's been internally said gets people to pay attention. It helps contribute to that, and also helps alleviate some of the fear that, wait, how is this really being used internally?
Yep.
We've talked about, okay, getting the 360 done. You have an outside source to do that. How important is the whole follow-up process in the 360 process, and how important is follow-up in general once the report is done?
Yeah, it's vital. I think I mentioned this a bit ago. You just can't drop that report in somebody's hands and say, here you go, and without taking further action. I think it could derail a leader, again, depending where their mindset is and where their focus is, with not having a chance to have conversations around what's in there, answer questions that may be, to challenge somebody in terms of the thinking, get them to think differently, to not allow the time and space for development after that report is created. It's all vital, right? It's not just about the report, but it's what you do with it that I think is critical. And that's where a great coach or mentor plays a huge role. Again, because we only see our side of what's in there, right? And the information of what it says. And without somebody else, we're going to define that the way that we want to. And that could be it can be damaging, I think, not only for that leader and their psyche and their mindset, but possibly whoever they lead. So that process is important for that leader themselves, but I also think it's important in another way. And if you think about it, you've got 10, 12, 15 individuals, direct reports, peers, that have been asked to provide feedback for this individual leader. And if that behavior doesn't change because nobody's kind of followed up on it or taken that person through the process to help them develop themselves, what are those individuals that filled out information, maybe gave very candid feedback, what are they going to say 6 months later when really nothing's been changed, or they perceive that their information, their opinions, their feedback is nothing? So I think you owe it to the organization that if you're going to have individuals spend some time and spend some energy in providing feedback, that you make their time feel valued, and that you make their opinions and their words meaningful by taking action on the other side of that. Because if they see nothing's being done as a result of their contributions, I think that could be I think that could have a negative impact too on not only that team, that leader, but the organization as well.
That's a great point, and word spreads quickly. That when you
Yeah.
talk about the horror stories of the past, that's a great example of, hey, you asked me to fill out these ratings, not just typically on one person, but I've done it on 7 or 8 people. I've invested some time. I've given you my thoughts, and it went nowhere. Well, why am I ever going to do that again? What's the no value in there? Excellent point. Our goal is to ultimately change behavior in a person. Again, we're not saying that everyone that goes to a 360 is weak across the board, or that they may not have any glaring deficiencies. If they did, chances are they wouldn't even be at the organization. But the point is, hey, there's room for improvement somewhere. Not everyone is perfect, or if they're perfect in their current job, you can identify that and start developing the skills that they may need for their next job from a succession planning or a high potential standpoint. So ultimately, the 360 feedback process is geared towards changing behavior.
Yep.
In your experience, it's hard to measure sometimes, but has it, I guess for lack of a better word, has it worked?
Yeah.
And what does it take for it to work?
Yeah, it definitely works. There's no doubt about that. Does it work 100% of the time? No, but there's factors to that. I think, one of the factors is that, again, if you're going to have somebody participate in a 360, again, understanding the process, that individual has to be able to have the safety to develop those areas that they need to from the organization. That time and safety needs to be provided to say, you know what, I know you have a couple things you can work on. I want you to be able to focus on that. And I think that's critical. If an organization isn't conducive to development or is not allowing for that opportunity to develop, it may not be successful. I think also the individual has to want to change, right? We are all owners of our own development. I own my development. Everybody owns their own development, and it's important that we make that a priority. And the easy response to that, or what I hear a lot of time is, again, I don't have the time. I'm just too busy, and I've got this, and this. I don't know how to free up some time for development. And I had an old colleague say to me very often, we don't manage our time, we manage our choices. And do you choose to prioritize development, or are you choosing not to? And I think when it comes down to it, it's about the choice of, yes, this is important. Yes, I'm willing to look at where I can improve, or look at my areas of development and my areas of strength, and determine how I can leverage those strengths and improve those areas of opportunity or development, so that I can become more effective, so that I can become a better leader. I think if somebody does not want to change, I think if somebody feels, again, that this is being forced upon them, they're just going to see it as information. They're probably going to disregard it. So you absolutely need that buy-in and that willingness. But if that's there and you have the right person supporting that individual that's gone through it, I think the sky's the limit. I think 360s can be the most valuable tool that a leader has in order to grow and develop.
Yeah, and really ultimately behavior can change, and like you said, it won't be for 100% of the cases, and don't set that as your goal. But with that behavior change comes ultimately a return on investment for the organization, which is sometimes hard to measure and hard to quantify, but return on investment can also be qualitative. So as an example, FIFCO is having a great year. Is part of that because they went through the 360 development process? Hard to measure if you wanted to try and quantify it, because the majority of it is due to a condition that exists in a pandemic that led to improved company performance, ultimately in the sales and everything that goes along with that. But there is still a value for behavior change, and the question is, does that ultimately, is that good for the organization? And as long as the competencies are aligned, as long as the people are happy about that, expectations are being met, we're meeting all the conditions, those are all good things for the company. It's not a waste of time. It's not a costly endeavor from a monetary standpoint. And it shouldn't be a costly endeavor from a development standpoint. So one of the kind of words of wisdom we try and share is, don't try and force development on top of somebody's existing job. Incorporate it into their existing job. So you cannot go to 20 hours of courses and readings over and above what you're doing in your 50 to 60 hour work week. It'll never get done. So how do you take the 50 to 60 hour work week and just carve out some of that to discuss and identify developmental needs?
Yep.
And I think, that is a key as you go forward. Don't think of this as, wow, I've got to double up the time in my job in order to get better. I can't do it. I'm too, burned out. Shouldn't happen that way. Won't happen that way.
Yep. Totally agree.
So obviously we've heard a lot. As I've said, I can talk about this for days on end, and we won't keep you much longer here. Ended up, hopefully some of the key takeaways is this is not a one shoe fits all. 360 is one word that implies it could be the same for everyone, but ultimately the implementation, the content, how you deal with coaching on a person can really easily be managed down to an individual level. So what one person gets from a coaching and feedback standpoint can be very different from what another person needs and therefore gets. I'm going to open this up to questions. Before we get into that, Rob, really appreciate your time today. There have been a few that have come in, but for those that will be disengaging with us, again, thank you very much for your time. And we'd love to hear from you, get any feedback. If you want a copy of any of the presentation, we're happy to share that as well. One question that came in is, how far down in the organization do you think 360s can be used? I assume they mean, executives. Is this an executive tool, or is it something that can be used for people other than executives in your mind?
Yeah, I think, my first response to that was you never want to give somebody a 360 when they are newer to their role, whether they're just kind of jumping into leadership or maybe even in a transition, just because maybe they haven't established a style, or those that they lead or work with don't have a lot of data or experiences to kind of go off of and provide information for. And I think there's a maturity that also goes along with having to participate or have a 360 done for you. I think that can come later on in somebody's leadership career. I don't want to put a black and white on it, but I think it is mostly used at the higher levels of leadership, executive, director, senior managers. Has it been used in frontline or middle manager in my past? Absolutely, it has. I think it's very situational. I think you have to, again, at those lower levels, maybe ensure that it's done for the right reasons, and that somebody at that level is going to be able to take action off of it and react the right way to it.
Yeah, exactly right. I totally agree. You bring up a good point. This is not a tool for brand new leaders because people haven't had the opportunity to observe the behaviors that they're about to be rating. So you also need to look at that. If you are using this on a bunch of people, if somebody is brand new to the role, you're not going to get good data on their performance in the current role because their raters haven't had the opportunity to observe them enough. Right. Another question that came in, just good question. Hopefully it's not applicable in years to come. But have COVID-19 restrictions affected your leadership efforts this year at all?
Our leadership, like leadership development, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that the 360 process, it must be, as leadership development looked different under COVID-19 versus
yes. Yeah.
Without.
And I think, again, we have many leaders who are now engaging with their teams and their peers much differently than they used to, right? So I think, where we are now, we're seeing our organization ways of working maybe becoming a little bit more permanent in terms of remote work becoming more prominent. I think we're going to have to react to that in terms of how we develop our leaders and what again, what some of those competencies are that we want to focus in on so that they can be effective leading remotely. And that's definitely a challenge. That brings a whole set of new challenges. And as we see, again, this way of working becoming a little bit more mainstream, I think we have to react to that. And now that we have more answers around that, I think we'll have to focus those changes. You know, over the last 7 or 8 months, we have reacted differently to it. You know, we couldn't be as strategic as we wanted. We had to be a little bit more reactive because of how quickly, you know, our organization changed and you know, what our leaders needed to continue to drive results. But now I think again, looking forward, having a little bit more certainty, we can adapt and we can start to focus the right way on the right competencies and behaviors. So that 360, we may have to change it around a little bit. That's to be determined, but I think we have to react to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's some practices that, in my mind, that are going to stay as a result of COVID-19. And one is Zoom meetings and conference calls and Teams
Yep.
meetings. And from a coach's perspective, I have found that it almost is able to, A, I like the visual better than just on the phone. And B, if you're waiting for live meetings for the coaching to take place, they're happening a lot more frequently with a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. You can schedule them, you know, 2 half-hour calls across 2 weeks is almost better than a 1-hour call a month or a 1-hour visit where you're trying to do a lot of other things. So I think from a coach's perspective, there have been some real benefits that have led to more frequent calls, more able to easily schedule. There's no travel time involved. From the participant side, and I know, Rob, we're faced with this with one of the people we're coaching, and that is he moved from being in the field 100% of the time to being in his home office 100% of the time, and he therefore has saved on travel costs. He's saved the time. He's able to, you know, not able to detach, but he has a lot more time on his hands, and he's dealing with the fires that he would have put out, you know, while on a plane. Those just don't come up. And one of his worries is, okay, when the real world opens back up, and you know, how does it's allowed him to develop faster, I think, but how is it going to translate when his job changes back to not having the time to be reflective or focus on some of the development activities and feedback and access to good information? I think for some it's just an unknown. Like Rob said earlier, for some people it'll work great, and for others they may struggle with that transition back into whatever the new world of working is. But yeah, I guess a very long-winded way of saying COVID-19 in my mind really has affected leadership efforts, not just this past year, but going forward.
Yeah.
I think it will change some practices in general.
Absolutely.
Well, those are all the questions I had. Again, Rob, really appreciate your time and insights today. And everyone have a good rest of your day, whether that's, again, morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And look forward to potentially having you on other webinars of ours in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.